Well, let's talk about prevention, because I think that's where we got to land is okay. These attacks are happening. How do we help our customers prevent? And I want to get to some of the technical stuff on the back end, but one of the things I'm seeing a lot of is that email filtering is actually a weak link now for a lot of customers. And there's a couple interesting things I picked up on. So talk about some of the email filtering technologies we can enable on the Microsoft side that can help to start to prevent that. And then I want to talk through one of the things I'm seeing in that area.
Yeah, certainly. So, with Business Premium, I'm always going to try to speak to that just because it has a really great security suite. Defender for Office 365 comes as part of that, which is your more advanced email security than you get with a basic Exchange Online protection plan. With the lower tier plans, but effectively that comes out with some more advanced configurations for things like anti-phishing policies as well as your anti-spam configuration. And, whenever you're going through and setting that up, you can tune it, for both domain impersonation considerations as well as, targeted impersonations, people trying to
Yep.
impersonate CEOs, controllers, and adding those for additional protections. But you also get access into things like safe links, as an example, which can do URL detonation for those, fake links that are being usually masked, the example I showed was a user, and we see this, a lot, where they got an email that looked like a OneDrive email of a user sharing a file with you, and it's completely, they just copy the CSS, right? Like it looks exactly like you would see coming from Microsoft. But that link in there, has that URL detonation. And in some cases, it'll prevent it. In some cases, it won't. But this is defense in depth talk about, kind of that layered protection. But on top of that, you also have ZAP protections or Zero Hour Auto Purge capabilities, all the acronyms from Microsoft. But effectively, that would allow you, if it does detect something as malicious where an attacker spread a campaign out to multiple users in your organization, it could actually remove those other emails from those inboxes. So you're just kind of quickly responding and removing things automated fashion versus having to sift through, the email flow or a message trace to try to figure out where these things came from.
Yeah, it's a great technology. We do a lot of Defender for Office 365. I love the products. Works really well. I'm finding two interesting gaps right now from a lot of my customers in that stack on the email flow inbound. One is a lot of people still have a third-party MX-based filter in front of their systems. They're running a Proofpoint, a Mimecast, a Pawbox, any number of these different MX record-based filtering or maybe HIPAA control tools where your mail flows through their servers and then it gets sent to you. And 20 years ago, I mean, that's where MX Logic came from. That's what we did, right? That's the way you built email filters 15 years ago, 10 years ago. But there's a real problem with it right now, which is you're effectively breaking a lot of the email security functions on email sent to you because Proofpoint now is the source for all your emails. So I get an email from Nick. He doesn't have Proofpoint on his SPF as an approved sender, but it goes through my Proofpoint server and then I get it. And Microsoft gets no data about the sending IP. It doesn't get to fully check the security, the TLS, the DKIM key gets broken because the chain of custody is broken. There's extra header information. And I'm seeing on multiple customers where I think that ability of Defender for Office 365 to really understand the mail flow is severely disruptive when you're running your mail intentionally through somebody else first. That other mail filter better be really good because Microsoft's getting a lot less data and can do a lot less. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but we're seeing
Yeah.
like actually legitimate problems with like also DKIM signing, like inbound emails just aren't correct because of that extra hop in the way.
Yeah, and I think we've seen, obviously I've definitely seen the same, and I think there's a big emphasis on getting the total stack with Microsoft in the sense of the machine learning that's going on through them getting all these signals, not just from your tenant but from everywhere. Where
Yes.
in my use case of testing, right, in the sense of this token theft, it actually picked up on my domain name being part of that Lure URL that I had registered, and it flagged it as malicious. So if I tried to go in and do it into another tenant, it prevented the email from coming through altogether versus the first use case. The email came through, the user clicked on it. It then determined, the site to be malicious infrastructure and it shut it down with the attack surface or the attack disruption capabilities.
Yep.
So it's also that defense in depth to say like they're getting all these signals that, are coming through. I certainly have seen the other side where we've seen blatant phishing emails get through, Defender for Office 365, and that's all they
Yes.
had, even with the tightest tuned settings that you could potentially
Yes.
get within there.
Yep.
So I hear when people are like, we saw this one thing came through, and we basically lost trust in the solution and moved to a Proofpoint or an Avanon, or these other solutions here that are more popular. But I think that's where it's like, well, the email may come through, but then you have these other six protections, right? That we're trying to put into place that would continue
Yes.
on in that attack chain that the attacker is, trying to actually breach the account on.
Right. And I think my perspective on it is, I love having a second layer of defense. I think it's a really good idea to have a second set of eyes. Proofpoint's going to have a different set of heuristics than Microsoft. There's value in that. It's worth investigating if you're using a third party. Do they have an API based version? So, for example, like an Iron Scales uses the API. So Microsoft gets all the data, and then Iron Scales goes and looks at your data. I know Proofpoint and Mimecast, and I believe Avanon, I think they all have an API based version. It's just not always deployed that way. And it's worth thinking through the consequences of giving them your MX record instead of using the API version. And with each tool, you'll have to look through the pros and cons. But I think these days, my opinion is, you're causing fundamental issues with the infrastructure we're building, DKIM, MTA-STS, all these new advanced technologies for really authenticating mail flow. Putting a filter in your MX flow is going to be detrimental to that. And I think it's better to lean on APIs for third party. So get off my soapbox, but that's just something I'm seeing. The other one I'm seeing a lot of these emails coming through as spoof domains. So people are sending themselves these. That's a really common tactic I hadn't seen before, and you would think it would be easy to disrupt, but I'm finding it's getting through the filters pretty regularly, and I think that's interesting. And there's a chain of thought on that, but I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, seeing that, I think, the spoof domains is definitely something where we also see, in combination of that, people have a lot of these settings for external sender warnings and, kind of the warning messages. Not
The
that,
information tips. Yeah.
all that users are going to look at that, right? Like, they're pretty tunnel vision in some
Right.
cases overseeing that, but it's an extra, layer there to help out in those use cases. And certainly, from the spoof domain aspect, you can try to add, your own internal domains, but also custom domains of your suppliers that you work most heavily with and things like that as well too. But yeah, certainly, a heavy mix of that, or even, getting into domains that aren't newly registered or parked, in that sense, where we could use DNS filtering in some cases, or
Right.
web content filtering in Defender to try to prevent them, because they might have bought them months ago and they've just been sitting on a bunch of random domains that look a little bit like Microsoft or non-malicious or whatever it might be. Just
Yes.
given it needs to be just a little bit, not out of the ballpark, right? If a user does look
Yeah.
in the URL.
Yep. No, for sure. I think the thing I'm seeing also is that for most of these people who are getting spoofed domains, they don't have their DMARC moved to a quarantine or reject setting.
Yes.
It's work to get there. You need to do reporting. You really have to drive on that. I think a lot of people are starting to get DMARC records, but they're setting them to none just to get to the base level of recommendation. And none's great. I mean, it's better than nothing. But the reality is, if you're getting spoofed, I think you have to push hard to get to the quarantine stage and say, I got to at least give even Microsoft the recommendation that if it doesn't pass SPF or DKIM, even Microsoft will honor that DMARC tag. And I think right now, most people just don't have that dialed in, and it's becoming really important, not for external purposes, but for people spoofing yourself. So
Yeah.
that's a little tip I'm kind of starting to pick up pretty regularly.
Yeah.